The daughter. No one wanted, just became the wife everyone feared. She stood in the shadows of her own home, watching her sisters dance in gowns bought with her inheritance. Alora Whitcomb had given everything, her dowry, her future, her very soul, to save a family that never saw her. Now, with creditors at the door and ruin closing in, she had one choice left. Marry the most dangerous man in England, a duke who didn't want love, a contract that promised survival, not happiness. But what society didn't know was that the forgotten daughter was about to become unforgettable. Stay until the end to see how she makes the most powerful man in London fall to his knees. Drop a like and tell us what city you're watching from. The morning light filtered through the threadbare curtains of Whitcomb House with a cruelty that matched the season itself. Alora stood before her mirror, fingers tracing the frayed edge of a dress she'd worn 3 times this month already. In the reflection, she could see what London society had already decided. She was forgettable, 24 years old, unmarried, unremarkable. The assessment stung less than it once had. She'd learned to wear invisibility like armor. "Alara, where are my pearls?" Her sister Cecilia's voice pierced through the walls, sharp with the entitlement of someone who'd never been denied anything. "In your jewelry box, second drawer," Alara called back, her voice steady despite the familiar ache in her chest. Those pearls had been her mother's. She'd given them to Cecilia for her debut last season, watching her sister shine in borrowed light. Everything in this house was borrowed now. Borrowed time, borrowed money, borrowed hope. The floors creaked as Alara made her way down the corridor, past rooms that had once gleamed with polish and pride. Now the silver was gone, sold. The paintings, auctioned. Even the good china had disappeared piece by piece, like a house eating itself to survive. "There you are." Her father's voice stopped her at the landing. Lord Edmund Whitcomb stood in the doorway of his study, and Alara felt her heart constrict at the sight of him. He'd aged a decade in the past 2 years. His shoulders curved under the weight of debts that multiplied like rats in the walls. "Father?" "Close the door." She obeyed, and the click of the latch sounded like a cell door closing. Edmund didn't look at her as he spoke. "The creditors came again this morning. Before dawn, like thieves, except they're the ones being robbed." His laugh was bitter. "Mr. Hartley says we have until month's end. After that," he gestured vaguely at the walls, the floor, the very air. "All of it goes." Alara had known this day was coming. She'd seen it in the arithmetic of their declining household, in the way her father's hands shook when he reviewed the ledgers, in the desperation that had turned her beautiful sisters into commodities to be sold to the highest bidder. "Cecilia's match with Lord Pemberton falls through if we're bankrupt before the wedding," Edmund interrupted. "His family won't tie themselves to scandal. And Lizette," he finally met her eyes, and Alara saw something in them that terrified her more than anger or disappointment. She saw defeat. "Your sister has 3 offers, 3 chances to save herself, but none of them will have her if our name is dragged through debtor's court." The words hung between them like smoke. "What are you saying?" Alara asked, though she already knew. She'd always known. "I'm saying you're the eldest. I'm saying your mother's dowry went to giving your sisters their chance. I'm saying—" He turned away, unable to finish, but Alara could finish it for him. "I'm saying you have nothing left to offer. I'm saying you're worthless to us now. I'm saying save us anyway." "I understand," she said quietly. "Do you?" Edmund's voice cracked. "Because I need you to understand completely, Alara. There is no money for your season, no prospects, no future," she completed. "I know, Father. I've known for 2 years. Month." The silence that followed was broken by laughter from upstairs. Cecilia and Lizette, trying on gowns for yet another ball, another hunt for husbands who could afford them. The sound was like glass breaking in Alara's chest. "There might be—" Edmund cleared his throat. "There's been an inquiry." Alara's head snapped up. "What kind of inquiry?" "The Duke of Blackthorn." The name landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of shock through the room. Everyone in London knew that name. The Duke of Blackthorn was a legend whispered about in drawing rooms and ballrooms. A man who'd inherited his title at 21 and turned a failing estate into an empire. Ruthless in business, cold in society, untouchable. and completely uninterested in marriage. Until now, apparently. He's seen you, Edmund continued, his words tumbling out faster now. At the Pemberton ball last month. He made inquiries about you specifically. Ilara's mind raced back to that evening, an event she'd attended only because Cecilia needed a chaperone. She'd spent most of the night in the corner watching her sister dance. She didn't remember seeing the Duke, didn't remember being seen. What does he want? Her father's expression told her everything. A wife? A convenient one. The word convenient hit harder than unloved or unwanted ever could. It was clinical, transactional. It reduced her to a function, not a person. And in exchange, Ilara asked, her voice hollow, he pays our debts. All of them. Cecilia and Lizette keep their prospects. The Whitcomb name survives. And I become, she couldn't finish, Duchess of Blackthorn. Edmund said it like it should be a comfort, like a title could warm a cold marriage. He's prepared to be generous with the settlement. Your sisters will have proper dowries. You'll want for nothing material. Just love, just choice, just a life of my own. But Ilara had learned long ago that her wants didn't matter. She was the eldest daughter in a family that valued beauty over duty, charm over sacrifice. She was the one who'd stayed home while her sisters conquered society, the one who'd smiled at their successes while wearing last year's dresses and this year's shame. She was the one who always paid the price. When does he want an answer? She asked. He's coming here. Tomorrow, noon. 24 hours to decide the rest of her life. Ilara nodded slowly, then turned to leave. Ilara. Her father's voice stopped her at the door. When she looked back, she saw something that might have been regret in his eyes, or maybe just relief that she hadn't argued. You're a good daughter. Your mother would be proud. The lie sat between them, transparent and sad. Her mother would have wept to see her eldest traded away like livestock. But her mother was 6 years dead, and Ilara had learned that the dead don't protect the living. I'll prepare for his visit, she said, and left before her composure could crack. That evening, Ilara sat in her room while her sisters prepared for yet another ball. Through the walls, she could hear them laughing, arguing about jewelry, debating which dance card to favor. Their voices were light, unburdened. They had no idea that their futures balanced on their eldest sister's shoulders. Ilara! Lizette appeared in her doorway, 17 and radiant in pink silk. Why aren't you dressed? We're leaving in 20 minutes. I'm not going. What? But Father said, Father needs me here tonight. The lie came easily. Ilara had become fluent in small deceits, the kind that kept peace and avoided explanations. Lizette's expression shifted from confusion to something that might have been pity. You can borrow my blue gown, the one with the, I'm fine, Lizette, go, enjoy yourself. Her sister hesitated, then shrugged and disappeared in a swirl of perfume and silk. Moments later, the house erupted with the chaos of departure. Carriages called, wraps fetched, last-minute adjustments to hair and hemlines. Then silence. Ilara stood and moved to her window, watching the carriage disappear down the street. Inside it, her sisters glittered with possibility. Out here, in the dark, she counted the cost of their shine. Her small escritoire held the evidence of her sacrifice. She opened the drawer and pulled out the letters. Correspondence with the family solicitor, documenting the transfer of her dowry to cover her father's debts 2 years ago. £10,000. Gone. Her chance at independence, a choice, dissolved to keep the wolves from the door just a little longer. It hadn't been enough. It was never going to be enough. Because her father wasn't just unlucky. He was weak. Weak at the card tables, weak in business, weak in the face of London society's expensive demands. And her sisters, beautiful and charming as they were, had learned to be expensive too. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Miss Ilara? Mrs. Hewitt, their housekeeper, peered in. The old woman's face was creased with worry. Your father asked me to bring you this. She held out a letter, sealed with black wax. The Duke's seal. Ilara took it with steady hands, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Thank you, Mrs. Hewitt. The housekeeper lingered. Whatever it says, miss, remember you've got a choice. Do I? Ilara asked softly. Mrs. Hewitt's eyes glistened. She'd been with the family since Ilara was born. She'd seen everything, the decline, the sacrifice, the slow erosion of hope. There's always a choice, love. It just ain't always a good one. When she was alone again, Elara broke the seal. The letter was brief, written in a hand that matched its sender, sharp, controlled, devoid of warmth. Miss Whitcomb, I understand your father has conveyed my proposal. I require a wife for reasons of estate management and social necessity. You require financial security for your family. The arrangement is mutually beneficial. I expect honesty, competence, and discretion. In return, I offer complete material comfort and the protection of my name. I do not offer affection, nor do I require it. If these terms are acceptable, I will call upon you tomorrow at noon to finalize the arrangement. Blackthorn. No dear Mo, no sincerely. No pretense that this was anything other than a business transaction. Elara read it 3 times, each word carving itself into her memory. This was her future. A marriage without love, a life without warmth, a bargain struck in desperation and accepted in defeat. She should have felt angry, should have raged against the unfairness of it all, that she was reduced to this, that her father could ask this, that the Duke could make such a cold proposal and expect acceptance. But instead, she felt something else, something that started as a small spark in her chest and grew with each breath. Clarity. If she was going to be sold, she would at least set the price. If she was going to marry without love, she would do it with her eyes open and her spine straight. If she was going to save her family, she would do it on terms that left her something, even if it was just her dignity. The Duke wanted honesty? She would give him brutal truth. He wanted competence? She would show him capability that would make him question whether he was getting the better end of this bargain. He wanted discretion? She would be a fortress. And if he thought marriage to an overlooked, dowryless spinster meant he was getting a meek, grateful wife who would fade into his vast estate like a ghost. Well, Adrian Blackthorn was about to discover he'd underestimated the forgotten daughter. The next morning, Elara rose before dawn. She bathed in cold water. The house couldn't afford to heat enough for luxury, and dressed with deliberate care. Not in her newest gown, which was still 3 seasons old, but in the one that fit her best, that made her look less like a supplicant and more like a woman who knew her worth. She pulled her dark hair back simply, refusing to chase the elaborate styles her sisters favored. If the Duke wanted to see her clearly, without artifice or pretense, then that's what he would get. By the time her family stirred, Elara was already in her father's study, reviewing the household accounts. The numbers were worse than she'd thought. Her father hadn't just been unlucky. He'd been catastrophically irresponsible. Debts to a dozen creditors, some with interest rates that should have been criminal. You're up early. Elara looked up to find her father in the doorway, still in his dressing gown. He looked older in the morning light, smaller somehow. I wanted to understand exactly what we owe, she said, gesturing to the ledgers spread before her. If I'm to negotiate my price, I should know what I'm worth to you. Edmund flinched. Elara, that's not fair? True? She stood, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that made him look away. It's both, father, and we both know it. So let's be honest, at least between ourselves. You need money. The Duke needs a wife. I'm the sacrifice that makes it work. You make it sound so cold, isn't it? The silence that followed was broken by the clock striking 9, 3 hours until the Duke arrived. What will you tell him? Edmund asked finally. That depends on what he offers, Elara replied. But father, whatever happens, whatever I agree to, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Stop. The single word carried the weight of years. Stop gambling. Stop spending beyond our means. Stop sacrificing your daughters to pay for your mistakes. If I do this, if I sell myself to save this family, then you need to be worth saving. Edmund's face crumpled. For a moment, Elara thought he might argue, might defend himself. Instead, he nodded, a broken motion that acknowledged every failure, every weakness, every time he'd chosen the easy path over the right one. I promise, he whispered. Elara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this sacrifice would mean something, would change something. But she'd learned that wanting didn't make things true. Then I'll meet the Duke, she said, and we'll see what price he puts on convenience. Adrian Blackthorn arrived at precisely noon, his carriage black as his name and twice as imposing. Alara watched from the window as he descended, tall, dark-haired, moving with the kind of controlled power that suggested he'd never stumbled in his life. He looked like a man who conquered, not courted. Mrs. Hewitt showed him to the drawing room, and Alara took a moment to steady her breathing before descending the stairs. This was it, the moment that would determine the rest of her life. She entered the drawing room to find him standing by the window, examining their meager attempts at maintaining appearances. He turned at her entrance, and Alara got her first clear look at the man who wanted to marry her. The Duke of Blackthorn was handsome in a severe way, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, a mouth set in a line that suggested smiling was a foreign concept. He was perhaps 30, though it was hard to tell. Men like him didn't age so much as calcify. Miss Whitcomb. His voice matched his appearance, controlled, cool, assessing. Your Grace. Alara curtsied, perfect form maintained through pure will. You may dispense with the formalities. If we're to marry, we should speak plainly. I appreciate directness, Alara said, moving to take a seat. She didn't wait for him to invite her. This was still her home, diminished as it was. Though I notice you prefer it in writing. Your letter was remarkably clear. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, that she wasn't playing the blushing, grateful maiden. I find clarity prevents misunderstanding. Do you have questions about my proposal? Several. Alara folded her hands in her lap, projecting a calm she didn't feel. First, why me? London is full of eligible women with dowries and connections I lack. Why seek out a spinster from a bankrupt family? Most men would have dissembled, offered pretty lies about her qualities or charms. Adrian Blackthorn simply nodded, as if approving of her directness. Because you need this marriage as much as I do, he said. A desperate wife won't make demands I can't meet. She won't expect love or romance or the other nonsense society claims marriage provides. She'll understand it's a transaction and behave accordingly. The word should have stung. Instead, Alara felt that strange clarity sharpen into something almost like respect. At least he was honest. And what, precisely, would you expect from this transaction? She asked. Management of my household, competent oversight of servants, estate matters when I'm in London, basic social obligations. He spoke as if listing requirements for a governess. I spend little time at Blackthorn Hall. Business keeps me in the city most of the year. You would have considerable autonomy. Supervised isolation, Alara translated, buried in the countryside while you conduct your life elsewhere. I prefer to think of it as independence. Most women would welcome the freedom. Most women haven't spent years watching their independence sold off piece by piece. Alara stood, moving to face him directly. If they were being honest, she might as well be completely honest. You want a wife who will manage your estate and stay out of your way. I understand. But what do I get beyond the settlement to my father? The protection of my name, material comfort, security. A gilded cage is still a cage, Your Grace. For the first time, something like emotion crossed his face, a flicker of what might have been irritation or interest. What is it you want, Miss Whitcomb? Because I was under the impression your family's circumstances left you few alternatives. You're right, Alara acknowledged. I have no options. But that doesn't mean I have no conditions. Name them. The air between them changed, charged with a tension that felt almost like a negotiation between equals rather than a powerful duke and a desperate woman. First, Alara said, the settlement must be irrevocable. My father's debts paid in full, with enough remaining to provide modest dowries for my sisters, not contingent on my behavior or subject to your whim. Agreed. Second, I want full authority over household matters. Not oversight, authority. If I'm to manage Blackthorn Hall, I do it completely or not at all. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. You're asking for considerable power. I'm asking for the ability to do the job you're hiring me for, Alara corrected. Unless you'd prefer a decorative wife who smiles and accomplishes nothing? A pause, then. Continue. Third, and most important, Alara took a breath, knowing this condition might break the entire negotiation. I will not be set aside. Whatever arrangement you have, whatever entanglements you maintain, I will not be replaced. Humiliated, perhaps. Ignored, likely. but not discarded for a mistress or a more convenient wife later. If you marry me, I remain your duchess until death." The silence that followed stretched thin as wire. Adrian studied her with an intensity that would have made her look away a year ago. But Alara had learned to hold her ground in the face of worse than a duke's scrutiny. She'd faced her own irrelevance, her own invisibility. She'd stared into the mirror and acknowledged that the world had decided she didn't matter. She could certainly meet Adrian Blackthorne's eyes and demand he see her. "You have spirit," he said finally. "I didn't expect that." "You expected a doormat, someone grateful for rescue who'd fade into the wallpaper." Alara's voice was steady, almost hard. "But I've been invisible my entire life, Your Grace. I've been the forgotten daughter, the sacrifice, the footnote in my own family's story. If I'm going to marry you, I'll be a duchess with all that entails, or I won't marry you at all." It was a bluff, and they both knew it. She had no other options, no other proposals, no future beyond this one cold offer. But something in Alara refused to accept this marriage without at least demanding dignity. Adrian moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his dark eyes, the harsh line of his jaw. He was trying to intimidate her, she realized, trying to see if she'd break. She didn't. "You're right," he said quietly. "I did expect someone grateful, someone manageable, someone who'd accept what I offered and ask for nothing more." A pause. "I believe I may have underestimated you, Miss Whitcomb. Will you grant my conditions?" The first two, without hesitation. The third, he stepped back, creating distance between them. "I have no intention of setting you aside. I don't take commitments lightly, even practical ones. If we marry, you'll remain Duchess of Blackthorne for life. You have my word." "And the entanglements?" Alara forced herself to ask. "I have none currently, nor do I intend to acquire any." His expression was unreadable. "I'm not a romantic, Miss Whitcomb, but neither am I a hypocrite. If I demand discretion from you, I'll practice it myself." It wasn't a promise of fidelity, exactly, but it was something, a thread of honor in this transaction. "Then I accept your proposal," Alara said, and felt the words seal her fate like wax on parchment. Adrian nodded once, businesslike. "The marriage will take place in 3 weeks. I'll have my solicitor draw up the contracts. Your father's debts will be cleared immediately. I won't have my future wife's family dragged through scandal before the wedding." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. It's pragmatic, not generous." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Miss Whitcomb. I appreciate your directness today. I expect the same honesty in our marriage. No games, no manipulations, no attempts to change the terms of our arrangement after the fact." "You'll have honesty," Alara promised, "though I can't promise you'll always like what you hear." For the first time, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "I suspect I won't. Good day, Miss Whitcomb. I'll send word about the wedding arrangements." And then he was gone, leaving Alara standing in the faded drawing room of her childhood home, engaged to a man who'd proposed without romance and promised without love. She should have felt devastated. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Power. Not much. Just a sliver, a fraction of control in a life that had offered her none. But it was there, real as the ring that would soon circle her finger. Adrian Blackthorne had come looking for a convenient wife. What he'd found was a woman who'd been underestimated her entire life and had learned to use that underestimation as a weapon. The forgotten daughter was about to become unforgettable, and heaven help anyone, including her future husband, who got in her way. The 3 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation that felt more like a funeral than a celebration. Cecilia and Lizette were ecstatic. Their eldest sister was marrying a duke, and more importantly, the money had arrived. Debts cleared, dowries secured, the Whitcomb name salvaged from ruin. They didn't ask if Alara was happy, didn't notice the absence of joy in her preparations. They were too busy planning their own futures, now brighter than ever, thanks to her sacrifice. Only Mrs. Hewitt saw the truth. "You don't have to do this," the old housekeeper whispered one evening, helping Alara pack her belongings. Everything she owned fit into 2 trunks, a humbling reminder of how little she'd been allowed to call her own. "Yes, I do," Alara replied softly. "But a marriage without love is still a marriage, and perhaps an honest one, in its way. At least I know what I'm getting. How many women can say that? Mrs. Hewitt's eyes filled with tears. Your mother would want you happy, love. My mother would want me safe, and I will be. I'm marrying the richest, most powerful man in England. I'll want for nothing material. But your heart, my heart belongs to me, Alara interrupted gently. And I'm not giving it away. Not to the Duke, not to anyone. It's the one thing I'm keeping for myself. The wedding took place on a gray morning that matched the mood perfectly. A small ceremony, family only, which for Adrian meant no one, and for Alara meant a father who couldn't meet her eyes and sisters who were already looking past her toward their own advantageous matches. Alara wore white, as tradition demanded, though the color felt like a lie. She wasn't pure or innocent or naively hopeful. She was a transaction in lace and silk, walking toward a future she'd chosen with cold calculation rather than warm affection. Adrian waited at the altar, severe in black, his expression giving away nothing. When Alara reached his side, he looked at her with the same assessing gaze he'd worn that day in her drawing room, seeing her clearly, without romance or illusion. "Ready?" he asked quietly, a question that encompassed far more than the ceremony. "As I'll ever be," she replied. The vows were traditional, spoken without stumbling or hesitation. When Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, a heavy band of gold and diamonds that felt like a shackle and a crown in equal measure, Alara felt the weight of her new life settle onto her shoulders. She was no longer Alara Whitcomb, forgotten daughter. She was Alara Blackthorne, Duchess. And as Adrian's lips brushed hers in a kiss that was dutiful rather than passionate, she made herself a promise. She would not waste this opportunity. She would not fade into obscurity in his vast estate. She would not be forgotten. She would make herself indispensable. She would prove her worth. She would show the world and her cold, controlled husband that the woman they'd all overlooked was stronger than any of them imagined. The wedding breakfast was mercifully brief. By mid-afternoon, Alara found herself in Adrian's carriage, leaving London behind as they headed north toward Blackthorne Hall. They rode in silence for the first hour, the space between them on the bench seat feeling vast as an ocean. Finally, Adrian spoke. "You're quiet." "I'm thinking." "About?" Alara turned to look at him fully. "About what happens next. You said you spend little time at the estate. When do you return to London?" "Tomorrow." The word hung between them, stunning in its finality. Tomorrow. Not even a week, not even days. Tomorrow, he would leave her alone in a strange house, among strange servants, with nothing but the title of Duchess and the expectation that she'd manage it all without support or guidance. "I see," Alara said carefully. "And you'll return? When business permits, monthly perhaps, maybe less. So our marriage begins with your departure. How fitting." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You knew what this arrangement entailed, Miss Duchess." "I did," Alara agreed. "I'm not complaining, merely noting the irony. Most brides get a honeymoon. I get autonomy by abandonment. Would you prefer I stayed? Hovered over your shoulder, second-guessing your management? No? And that, at least, was honest. I prefer exactly what you're offering, the freedom to prove myself without interference." He studied her profile. "You really mean that." "I really do. I've spent my entire life being managed, directed, told what to do and how to be useful. For the first time, I'll have authority that's actually mine. I won't waste it trying to turn this marriage into something it isn't." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Not warmth exactly, but perhaps a grudging respect. "Then we understand each other." "Perfectly," Alara said, and turned back to the window, watching the countryside roll past, carrying her toward a future she'd build with her own hands, in a cold marriage to a colder man. The forgotten daughter was gone. The Duchess had arrived, and she had no intention of being convenient. Blackthorne Hall emerged from the mist like a fortress built to repel rather than welcome. Gray stone walls rose 3 stories high, towers flanking each corner, windows staring down like unblinking eyes. It wasn't beautiful. It was formidable, a monument to power that had no interest in charm. Alara's first thought was that it matched its master perfectly. The carriage rolled to a stop before the main entrance, and Adrian descended first, turning to offer his hand. Alara took it, her fingers disappearing into his larger grasp, and stepped down onto gravel that crunched beneath her feet like bones. A line of servants waited at attention, their faces carefully neutral. At the front stood a woman who could only be the housekeeper, tall, severe, her gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. She wore black from neck to hem, and her expression suggested she'd just tasted something unpleasant. "Mrs. Daventry," Adrian said by way of introduction, "this is the new Duchess. See that she's settled." The housekeeper's curtsy was technically correct, but carried all the warmth of a winter grave. "Your Grace, welcome to Blackthorn Hall." The words were right. The tone said, "You don't belong here." Alara met the woman's gaze steadily. "Thank you, Mrs. Daventry. I look forward to learning how the household runs." "The household runs quite efficiently already, Your Grace. Has done for 20 years under my management." The challenge was unmistakable. This was Mrs. Daventry's domain, and she had no intention of surrendering authority to some desperate girl who'd married her way into a title. "Then you'll be an excellent resource as I take over," Alara replied smoothly. "I appreciate competence. It makes transition so much easier." A flicker of something, surprise, irritation, crossed the housekeeper's face before her mask of professional neutrality returned. Behind her, Alara caught several servants exchanging glances. They'd expected a timid bride, not one who claimed authority in her first sentence. Adrian, to his credit, didn't interfere. He simply watched the exchange with that same assessing gaze, as if curious how this particular test would play out. "Show the Duchess to her rooms," he said finally. "I'll be in my study." And without another word, without even a glance at his new wife, he strode into the house, his footsteps echoing on marble floors before fading into the depths of the estate. Mrs. Daventry's expression suggested vindication. "If your Grace will follow me." The interior of Blackthorn Hall was as cold as its exterior. High ceilings that swallowed sound, dark wood paneling that absorbed light, furniture that prioritized intimidation over comfort. As they climbed the main staircase, Alara noted the portraits lining the walls. Generations of Blackthorn staring down with the same severe expression Adrian wore, as if coldness was bred into the bloodline. "The Duke's chambers are in the east wing," Mrs. Daventry said, gesturing vaguely to the left. "Your rooms are in the west." Opposite ends of the house. Of course, the suite Mrs. Daventry showed her to was technically beautiful. Silk wallpaper, a four-poster bed with heavy curtains, windows overlooking the grounds. But it felt like a display room in a museum, perfect and untouched and utterly devoid of life. "The previous Duchess's rooms," Mrs. Daventry said, watching Alara's reaction carefully. "The Duke's mother?" "Yes, Your Grace. She passed 8 years ago. The rooms have been maintained but unused since." Alara moved to the window, looking out at the formal gardens below. Everything was precise, geometric, controlled. Even nature at Blackthorn Hall was forced into submission. "I'd like a tour of the house tomorrow," Alara said. "Complete, including the kitchen, storage rooms, servant quarters. I want to understand how everything operates." "That's highly unusual, Your Grace. The Duchess typically—" "I'm not the previous Duchess," Alara interrupted, turning to face the housekeeper fully. "And I don't intend to be a figurehead who sits in her rooms and leaves everything to staff. I will manage this household, Mrs. Daventry. The question is whether you'll make that easy or difficult." The silence stretched taut as wire. 9 o'clock then, Your Grace," Mrs. Daventry said finally, her voice clipped. "I'll have a complete tour prepared." "Excellent. That will be all." The housekeeper's curtsy was marginally stiffer this time. When she left, closing the door with exaggerated care, Alara finally allowed herself to breathe fully. The forgotten daughter might be gone, but the Duchess was still finding her footing in boots that felt 3 sizes too large. She moved to her trunks, delivered in waiting, and began unpacking. Everything she owned looked shabby in these opulent rooms. Her dresses were outdated, her books worn, her few pieces of jewelry modest compared to the diamonds glittering in the case on the vanity. The previous Duchess's diamonds, she realized, left behind like everything else. A knock interrupted her unpacking. "Come in." A young maid entered, barely 18, with copper hair and nervous hands. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, I'm Annie. Mrs. Daventry assigned me as your lady's maid." Alara studied the girl. What did you do before this assignment, Annie? Scullery maid, Your Grace. I don't know much about being a lady's maid, but Mrs. Daventry said. She stopped, biting her lip. Said what? That it didn't matter much since you probably wouldn't know the difference anyway. The words hung in the air, brutal in their honesty. Alara should have been offended, should have dismissed the girl, demanded someone more experienced, asserted her authority. Instead, she found herself almost smiling. Mrs. Daventry isn't wrong, Alara said. I've been dressing myself for years. Never had a lady's maid. So we'll learn together, shall we? You teach me how things are done here, and I'll try not to make your job impossible. Annie's eyes widened. You're not angry? Why would I be angry at honesty? I'd rather know what people actually think than have them smile while plotting behind my back. Alara gestured to the trunks. Help me finish unpacking and tell me about the household. Who's loyal to Mrs. Daventry? Who might be open to new management? Who I should watch carefully? The girl hesitated, caught between training that said servants didn't gossip and an opportunity that might never come again. It's not gossip if I'm asking, Alara prompted. It's intelligence, and I need it if I'm going to survive here. That word, survive, seemed to unlock something in Annie. She moved to the trunk and began hanging dresses with careful hands. Most of the staff are loyal to Mrs. Daventry, she said quietly. She hired them, trained them, runs everything with an iron hand. They respect her because she's fair but hard. The Duke never interferes, barely visits, so she's been the real authority for years. And now I'm here to disrupt that. Yes, Your Grace. They're waiting to see if you'll last. Waiting to see if I'll fail, you mean? Annie flinched but didn't deny it. Alara absorbed this information, adding it to the calculations already forming in her mind. She'd walked into a hostile territory where the existing power structure had no interest in her success. Mrs. Daventry ruled this domain, and a new duchess, especially one with no training, no connections, and a marriage born of desperation rather than love, was a threat to be neutralized. But Alara had spent years being underestimated. She knew how to use that. Who's the butler? She asked. Mr. Graves, Your Grace. He's been with the family 30 years, proper as they come, loyal to the Duke above all. And the cook? Mrs. Palmer. She's been here 15 years, gets along with Mrs. Daventry well enough. Makes excellent meals but doesn't tolerate interference in her kitchen. Alara filed away each name, each detail, building a map of the territory she'd have to navigate. Anyone I should trust? Annie paused in her work, considering. There's Mr. Fletcher, the head groundskeeper. He doesn't involve himself in house politics. And maybe me, Your Grace. If you'll have me. I know I'm inexperienced, but I'm good at listening and better at keeping secrets. Why help me, Annie? You barely know me. The girl met her eyes directly for the first time. Because you're the first person in this house who's treated me like I have a brain. And because I watched the last duchess fade away in these rooms, ignored and isolated until she died more from loneliness than illness. I don't want to watch it happen again. The words landed like stones in still water. So the previous duchess hadn't been some paragon of society who'd run the estate with confident grace. She'd been another woman ground down by the cold machinery of Blackthorn Hall. Alara refused to follow that path. Then we understand each other, she said. You help me navigate this place, and I'll make sure you're rewarded for your loyalty. Deal? Deal, Your Grace. It was a small alliance, but it was something. A foothold in enemy territory. That evening, Alara dressed for dinner with care. She chose her best gown, still shabby by duchess standards, but the best she had, and let Annie arrange her hair in a simple style that at least looked intentional rather than amateur. The dining room was vast and echoing, designed for entertaining dozens, but currently set for 2. Adrian was already seated at the head of the table when Alara entered, reading correspondence while he waited. He glanced up as she approached. You look... He paused, searching for the appropriate word. Underdressed for a duchess? Alara supplied, taking her seat at the opposite end of the table. The distance between them could have fit her entire family. I was going to say presentable. How generous. A servant appeared to pour wine, and Alara noted the way he avoided making eye contact with her, another sign of where loyalties lay in this household. Mrs. Daventry mentioned you wanted a complete tour tomorrow, Adrian said, cutting into his meat with surgical precision. I did. I assume you have no objection? Why would I? It's what I hired you for. The word hired stung more than it should have. This was a job, not a marriage. She needed to remember that. How long have you had Mrs. Daventry? Alara asked. She came with the estate. My mother hired her 25 years ago. He took a sip of wine. She's competent, efficient, and runs the household without requiring my attention. I see no reason to change that arrangement. Even if your new wife has different ideas about management, Adrian set down his glass, giving her his full attention for the first time since she'd entered. Do you have different ideas? I have standards, Alara said carefully, and I have expectations for how a duchess should run her household. Whether those align with Mrs. Daventry's methods remains to be seen. And if they don't, then we'll address it when necessary. A pause, tense with unspoken challenge. Finally, Adrian nodded. Fair enough, but understand this. I won't tolerate chaos or drama. If you and Mrs. Daventry clash, resolve it quickly and quietly. I have no patience for household politics. Noted. And understand this. Alara matched his tone exactly. I won't be a decorative figurehead who rubber stamps someone else's decisions. You gave me authority over this household. I intend to use it. Their eyes met across the expansive table, two wills testing each other's boundaries. I believe we understand each other, Adrian said finally. Perfectly. The rest of the meal passed in near silence, broken only by the clink of silver on china and the occasional instruction to servants. When it was over, Adrian stood. I leave for London at dawn. I'll send word when I plan to return. Of course, safe travels. He paused at the doorway, looking back at her. One more thing. Don't fail, Alara. I have no use for a wife who can't manage what I've asked her to manage. The threat was clear, even wrapped in formal language. Succeed or be discarded, marriage vows be damned. I don't intend to fail, Alara replied evenly. I've never had that luxury. Something flickered in his expression, recognition perhaps of a kindred spirit who understood that failure meant ruin. Then he was gone, and Alara was alone in the vast dining room, the weight of her task settling onto her shoulders like a yoke. She'd survived being the forgotten daughter. Now she had to survive being the unwanted duchess, and she was starting to realize that might be the harder battle. The next morning dawned cold and gray, matching Alara's mood as she prepared for her tour. Annie helped her dress in a practical gown, and at precisely 9 o'clock, Alara descended to find Mrs. Daventry waiting in the entrance hall. Your Grace. The greeting was correct but frosty. Shall we begin? For the next 3 hours, Mrs. Daventry led Alara through Blackthorn Hall with the air of a general inspecting troops. Every room was immaculate, every servant precisely positioned, every system running with mechanical efficiency, and every explanation carried an underlying message. This is my domain. You are unnecessary here. The kitchens operate on a strict schedule, Mrs. Daventry said as they entered the massive cooking area. Mrs. Palmer prepares meals according to the Duke's preferences, which I've documented over years of service. Any changes would disrupt the entire system. Translation: don't interfere. The storage rooms are inventoried weekly, she continued in the wine cellar. Every bottle accounted for, every item tracked. I maintain complete records going back a decade. Translation: I know where everything is, you don't. By the time they reached the servant quarters, Alara's patience was wearing thin. The rooms were adequate but Spartan, some barely heated, others clearly damp. How long has that leak been there? Alara asked, pointing to a water stain on one ceiling. Several months, Your Grace. The roof repairs are scheduled for spring. It's November. Spring is 6 months away. The budget is now my concern, Alara interrupted. These are people, Mrs. Daventry, not equipment. They deserve dry rooms and proper heat. I want that leak fixed within the week and all the servant quarters inspected for similar problems. Mrs. Daventry's expression hardened. With respect, Your Grace, you've been here less than a day. You don't understand how things work at Blackthorn Hall. Then explain it to me, or step aside while I figure it out myself. The challenge hung between them, and for a moment Alara thought the housekeeper might actually refuse. might push this confrontation to its breaking point on day one. Instead, Mrs. Daventry's lips thinned into a razor line. As you wish, Your Grace, though the Duke may have questions about the expenditure. The Duke left me in charge. Let me worry about his questions. They completed the tour in icy silence, and when it was done, Mrs. Daventry delivered her parting shot with surgical precision. Will that be all, Your Grace? Or would you like to completely reorganize the household you don't yet understand? Alara smiled, the expression as cold as anything Adrian could have managed. That will be all for now, Mrs. Daventry, but we'll be having regular meetings to discuss household operations. I expect detailed reports on budgets, staffing, and maintenance, starting tomorrow. Tomorrow is Sunday, Your Grace. The staff will continue their normal routines, but you and I will meet in the morning room at 10. Come prepared. The housekeeper's curtsy was mechanical, her face stone. When she left, Alara sagged against the wall, exhaustion and anger warring in her chest. She'd made an enemy. On her first full day as Duchess, she'd drawn a line in the sand and dared Mrs. Daventry to cross it. And the worst part? She wasn't sure she could win this war. The next 2 weeks became a battle of wills fought in requisition forms and household schedules. Mrs. Daventry provided the requested reports, technically accurate but deliberately obtuse, designed to confuse rather than clarify. Alara spent hours deciphering the housekeeper's coded entries, cross-referencing expenses, hunting for inefficiencies. She found them. Small things at first: overpayment for supplies, duplicate orders, mysterious line items that couldn't be explained. Then larger problems: a groundskeeper employed but never seen, a wine order that never arrived but was paid for anyway, maintenance completed that was never done. Either Mrs. Daventry was incompetent or she was embezzling. Alara suspected the latter. You need to be careful, Your Grace, Annie whispered one evening as she helped Alara prepare for bed. Mrs. Daventry knows you're looking into the accounts. The whole staff knows. They're choosing sides. And which side are they choosing? Annie's silence was answer enough. Alara was losing. For every small change she implemented, better quarters for the servants, fair wages for the groundskeepers, proper maintenance schedules, Mrs. Daventry undermined her with subtle sabotage. Orders got lost. Instructions were misunderstood. Staff members developed sudden illnesses when Alara needed them most. And through it all, no word from Adrian. No support, no guidance, no acknowledgement that his new wife existed. She was alone in enemy territory, fighting a war she was slowly losing. The breaking point came 3 weeks after the wedding. Alara descended for breakfast to find the morning room in chaos. The table wasn't set, no food prepared, no servants in sight. She found Mrs. Daventry in the kitchen, calmly drinking tea while the cook stood idle. What's happening? Alara demanded. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, Your Grace, Mrs. Daventry said, her tone suggesting she found the situation more amusing than concerning. The staff believed your orders countermanded mine regarding the breakfast schedule. As a result, nothing was prepared. Such confusion is inevitable when there are conflicting authorities in the household. The message was unmistakable. Submit, or this gets worse. Alara felt rage bloom in her chest, hot and sharp. This wasn't about breakfast. This was a power play, a public demonstration that Mrs. Daventry still controlled Blackthorn Hall and the new Duchess was irrelevant. Every servant in the kitchen watched this confrontation, waiting to see who would blink first. Alara didn't blink. Mrs. Palmer, she said, addressing the cook directly, please prepare breakfast as usual, for myself and Mrs. Daventry. We'll be dining together this morning. The cook's eyes widened. Both of you, Your Grace? Yes. We have matters to discuss. Alara turned to the housekeeper. Don't we, Mrs. Daventry? The older woman's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps. She'd expected Alara to back down or explode in anger. Instead, the Duchess was calling her bluff. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in the morning room, breakfast laid out between them like ammunition. You've made your point, Alara said quietly. You control the staff. You've run this household for 20 years. I'm an interloper with no experience and no support. Is that accurate? Mrs. Daventry inclined her head. That's the situation, Your Grace. Yes. And you believe that gives you the right to undermine me, to sabotage my authority. To make me fail. I believe it gives me the right to protect this household from inexperienced meddling. Meddling. Alara set down her teacup with exaggerated care. Is that what you call fixing leaks in servant quarters? Investigating financial irregularities? Ensuring fair treatment for staff? I call it disruption. This household functions perfectly well without your interference. Does it? Alara pulled a folded paper from her pocket and laid it on the table between them. This is a record of expenses from the past year. There are discrepancies, Mrs. Daventry. Significant ones. Money paid for services never rendered. Supplies ordered but never received. Unless you can explain them, I have to conclude someone is stealing from the Duke. The color drained from Mrs. Daventry's face. You're accusing me? I'm not accusing anyone yet. I'm asking for explanations, which you can provide now privately, or I can write to the Duke and ask him to conduct an investigation. Your choice. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the servants who'd been hovering in the corridor seemed to hold their breath. Mrs. Daventry's hands trembled slightly as she picked up her teacup, and Alara knew she'd won. The housekeeper might control the staff, but Alara controlled the evidence, and Adrian Blackthorne, cold as he was, would not tolerate theft from his estate. Some of those expenses, Mrs. Daventry said finally, her voice strained, were approved by the late Duchess, personal arrangements that continued after her death. I saw no reason to discontinue them. Such as payments to her former lady's maid who lives in the village, a pension essentially for faithful service, and the groundskeeper who never appears. The late Duchess's nephew, she wanted him employed even though he has difficulties. He comes twice monthly to collect his wage. It wasn't embezzlement, Alara realized. It was charity, hidden in the accounts, continued by a housekeeper who'd been loyal to her previous mistress even after death. She'd been wrong. And in being wrong, she'd pushed this confrontation to a point where there could be no easy retreat. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Alara asked. Because you came in here demanding authority you haven't earned, changing systems you don't understand, treating me like an adversary rather than a resource. Mrs. Daventry's composure cracked just slightly. I've served this house for 25 years, Your Grace. I held the late Duchess's hand when she died. I've kept these halls running while the Duke builds his empire in London. And you've been here 3 weeks. The words hung between them, sharp with truth. Alara had been so focused on proving herself, on refusing to be overlooked or dismissed, that she'd made the same mistake everyone else had made with her. She'd judged without understanding. She'd seen an enemy when she should have seen a complicated ally. You're right, Alara said quietly. I came in fighting because I've spent my entire life being dismissed. I assumed you were trying to push me out when you were actually trying to protect the legacy of a woman you respected. Mrs. Daventry said nothing, but her rigid posture softened fractionally. I can't be the late Duchess, Alara continued. I don't know how she ran things or what promises she made. But I can be fair, I can listen, and I can acknowledge when I've been wrong. She paused. Will you help me? Not because I'm demanding it, but because this household deserves better than 2 women fighting over who has the right to run it. The housekeeper studied her for a long moment, decades of experience reading people evident in her sharp gaze. What are you proposing, Your Grace? A partnership. You teach me how things really work here, the official systems and the unofficial ones. I bring fresh perspective and the Duke's authority when we need it. We manage Blackthorne Hall together. And if we disagree, then we discuss it like adults rather than sabotaging each other like children. Mrs. Daventry almost smiled. Almost. The Duke won't like changes. The Duke doesn't like anything, Alara replied. But he hired me to manage his household. As long as it runs efficiently and doesn't cause him problems, I suspect he'll stay out of it. Another pause, weighted with calculation. Finally, Mrs. Daventry nodded. Very well, Your Grace. A partnership. But understand, I will not compromise the care of this household or the welfare of the staff. Those are my lines. Agreed. And mine is transparency. No more hidden arrangements, no more coded reports. We work together or not at all. They shook hands across the table, and Alara felt the first real surge of hope since arriving at Blackthorne Hall. She hadn't won completely. Mrs. Daventry's loyalty would have to be earned, not demanded, but she'd turned an enemy into a tentative ally. It was progress. Over the following days, the atmosphere in Blackthorn Hall began to shift. Mrs. Daventry proved to be an invaluable resource when she wasn't actively sabotaging Alara's efforts. She knew every corner of the estate, every quirk of the staff, every system that made the household function. And Alara, for her part, brought organization to the chaos of the hidden accounts, streamlining processes and implementing fair policies that benefited everyone. The staff noticed. Slowly, carefully, they began to warm to their new duchess, not with enthusiasm, but with cautious respect. She worked harder than they expected. She listened more than they'd thought possible. She treated them like people rather than furniture. Alara was building something here. Not love, not even loyalty yet, but a foundation. And then Adrian's letter arrived. She was in the study, reviewing the quarterly accounts with Mrs. Daventry, when Mr. Graves brought in the post. One letter bore the Duke's seal. Alara's hands trembled slightly as she broke the wax and read the terse message. Returning tomorrow. Bringing a guest. Ensure the East Wing is prepared. That was all. No greeting, no explanation of who the guest was or how long they'd be staying. Just orders, delivered with the warmth of a business memo. The East Wing? Mrs. Daventry's voice held a note of concern. That's unusual. Why? The Duke never brings guests to Blackthorn Hall. Never. In all the years I've served here, he's kept this estate completely separate from his London life. Alara felt unease settle in her stomach. Then why now? The housekeeper's expression was grave. I don't know, Your Grace, but in my experience, when a man brings someone to the home he's kept private, it's either very important or very dangerous. The letter crumpled slightly in Alara's grip as she stared at the words again. Adrian was coming back, and he was bringing someone with him, someone important enough to warrant breaking his own patterns, someone who might be coming to challenge the Duchess, who'd barely established herself. Alara had survived her family's betrayal, won a cold war with her housekeeper, and started building authority in a household that resented her presence. But as she looked at that brief, brutal letter, she realized her real test was only just beginning. Tomorrow the Duke would return, and whoever he was bringing with him would either accept Alara's place as Duchess of Blackthorn, or try to take it from her. The East Wing blazed with light by the time Adrian's carriage arrived the next evening. Alara had spent the entire day preparing, directing servants with the precision of a general arranging troops for battle. Every room had been aired, every surface polished, every detail perfected. If this mysterious guest was coming to judge her capability as Duchess, they would find nothing to criticize, at least nothing in the household management. She stood in the entrance hall as the carriage rolled to a stop, Mrs. Daventry at her side. The housekeeper's presence felt less like support and more like witness to whatever was about to unfold. Adrian descended first, his movements as controlled as ever. But there was something different in his expression, a tension around his eyes that Alara hadn't seen before. He looked like a man bracing for impact. Then the guest emerged. She was beautiful. Not merely pretty or handsome, but devastatingly, impossibly beautiful in a way that made Alara's breath catch. Golden hair that caught the lamplight, flawless skin, a figure that made her emerald traveling dress look like it had been painted on. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her effect on others. And when her eyes met Alara's, they held a calculating coldness that no amount of beauty could disguise. Alara, Adrian said, his voice carefully neutral, may I present Lady Vivian Ashford, an old acquaintance from London. She'll be staying with us for a time. An old acquaintance. The words were chosen too carefully, weighted with history Adrian wasn't sharing. Lady Vivian extended a gloved hand, her smile perfect and predatory. Your Grace, how charming to finally meet Adrian's new wife. I've heard so much about you. The emphasis on new wasn't subtle. Neither was the possessive way she said Adrian's name, as if she had more right to it than his actual wife did. Alara took the offered hand, matching grip for grip. Lady Ashford, welcome to Blackthorn Hall. I trust your journey was pleasant? Long, Vivian replied, her gaze sweeping over the entrance hall with the air of someone cataloging deficiencies. But then, it's been ages since I visited. 3 years? 4? Time blurs when you're busy with London society. When you're busy with London society. Another pointed reminder that Vivian belonged to Adrian's real world, while Alara was exiled to the countryside. Mrs. Daventry will show you to your rooms, Alara said smoothly, refusing to take the bait. I'm sure you'll want to refresh yourself after such a journey. How thoughtful. Vivian's smile sharpened. Though I do hope we'll have time to chat later. I'm dying to hear how you're managing. This house can be so overwhelming for someone unaccustomed to it. Before Alara could respond, Adrian interrupted. I'll show Lady Ashford to her rooms myself. We have business to discuss. He offered his arm, and Vivian took it with the ease of long familiarity, her hand resting on his sleeve like it belonged there. As they ascended the stairs together, their heads bent in quiet conversation, Alara felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't just a guest. This was a woman who knew Adrian, who had history with him, who moved through Blackthorn Hall like she had every right to be here. And Adrian hadn't warned Alara, hadn't prepared her, had simply arrived with this beautiful threat and expected his wife to… what? Accept it? Ignore it? Your Grace, Mrs. Daventry said quietly, perhaps we should retire to your sitting room. Translation, get out of sight before your humiliation becomes public. No, Alara said, her voice harder than she'd intended. I'll be in the study. Please ensure dinner is prepared for 3. We'll dine together tonight. If Vivian thought she could arrive and immediately claim territory in Alara's household, she was about to learn otherwise. 2 hours later, Alara descended for dinner wearing the best gown she owned, the deep blue silk she'd been saving, the one that almost made her look like she belonged in a duke's house. Annie had arranged her hair with extra care, and the previous duchess's diamonds glittered at her throat. Armor, all of it. The appearance of confidence when inside she felt like she was walking into an ambush. Vivian was already in the drawing room when Alara entered, and the transformation from travel-worn guest to polished society beauty was complete. She wore ruby silk that matched her lips, and every inch of her screamed wealth, breeding, and absolute certainty of her place in the world. Adrian stood by the window, and when he turned to face Alara, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps. He'd never seen her dressed formally before. You look well, he said, the words stiff and formal. Thank you. Lady Ashford, I hope your rooms are satisfactory? Perfectly adequate. Vivian settled onto the sofa with practiced grace. Though I must say, the East Wing feels different, more lived in. The late Duchess kept it quite formal. There it was again. The comparison to Adrian's mother, the subtle reminder that Vivian had known this house, this family, before Alara existed in their world. I'm sure many things have changed since your last visit, Alara replied evenly. Households evolve. Indeed. Adrian mentioned you've been making quite a few changes, disrupting long-standing arrangements, questioning established systems. Vivian's smile was poison wrapped in honey. How bold of you. Alara's eyes cut to Adrian, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. So he'd been discussing her management with Vivian, sharing complaints, perhaps, or worse, mocking her efforts. I prefer thorough to bold, Alara said. A duchess who doesn't understand her own household is hardly doing her duty. Oh, I completely agree. Though, of course, some of us were raised for such duties. Training and breeding do matter, don't they, Adrian? Adrian's jaw tightened. Dinner should be ready. Shall we? The meal was excruciating. Vivian held court like a queen, regaling them with stories from London society, the balls Alara would never attend, the scandals involving people she'd never meet, the world that existed parallel to her isolated existence at Blackthorn Hall. And through it all, she managed to make every story an implicit comparison between herself, vibrant, connected, sophisticated, and Alara, provincial, inexperienced, inadequate. And then Lord Pemberton said the most ridiculous thing, Vivian laughed, touching Adrian's arm with casual intimacy. You remember, darling, at the Duchess of Marlborough's garden party? The one where you and I… She stopped, as if suddenly remembering Alara's presence. Oh, but I'm boring your wife with all this London gossip. How thoughtless of me. Darling. The endearment hung in the air like smoke. Not at all, Alara said, her voice ice smooth. Though I am curious, Lady Ashford, what brings you to Blackthorn Hall? Adrian mentioned business, but I wasn't aware we were expecting a prolonged visit.
Vivian's smile didn't waver. Didn't Adrian tell you? I'm here to help. Help with what? Why, with preparing for the season, of course.
Adrian and I discussed it extensively during the journey. You'll need to present yourself in London society as his duchess, and given your unique background, I've generously offered to serve as your guide. Consider me your tutor in all things duchess-related. The words landed like slaps, each one carefully aimed to wound. Unique background. Translation: unsuitable, unprepared, beneath this role. Alara's hands clenched beneath the table, but her expression remained serene. How kind, though I'm uncertain why my husband would arrange such tutoring without consulting me first. She looked directly at Adrian, who had gone very still. It seemed practical, he said finally. You have no experience with London society. Lady Ashford does. The arrangement benefits everyone. Everyone except your wife, who apparently has no say in her own education. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Vivian's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. She'd accomplished exactly what she'd come here to do. Create conflict, expose the cracks in this cold marriage, position herself as the knowledgeable insider against Alara, the ignorant outsider. I think, Vivian said sweetly, that I'll retire. The journey has quite exhausted me. We can begin your lessons tomorrow, Your Grace. I'm sure we have so much to discuss. She swept from the room in a rustle of silk, leaving Alara and Adrian alone in the echoing silence. You should have told me, Alara said quietly. You should have warned me you were bringing her here. I didn't think it would matter. You didn't think... Alara stood abruptly, fury finally breaking through her careful control. You bring a woman who clearly has history with you, who treats me like an incompetent child, who calls you darling at my own dinner table, and you didn't think it would matter? Vivian and I have known each other for years. She's a family friend. She's more than that. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. Adrian's expression hardened. My past is my own business. I made that clear when we married. Your past isn't sleeping in the East Wing. Alara's voice rose despite her best efforts. Your past isn't offering to tutor me like I'm some embarrassing project that needs fixing. Your past isn't undermining me in my own home. You're overreacting. Am I? Or am I finally reacting appropriately to the realization that you brought your former lover here to replace me? The word hung between them, lover, and Adrian didn't deny it. The confirmation was there in his silence, in the way he looked away, in the tension radiating from his rigid posture. It's not like that, he said finally. Then what is it like, Adrian? Explain it to me. Because from where I'm standing, you've humiliated me, undermined my authority, and brought a viper into my household without the courtesy of a warning. She offered to help. You clearly need it. I need support, not sabotage. I need a husband who doesn't treat me like a business arrangement that needs quality control oversight. The words echoed in the vast dining room, raw and honest and far too revealing. Alara had promised herself she wouldn't care, wouldn't let the coldness of this marriage wound her. But standing here, facing the evidence that even in this loveless union she wasn't enough, the pain cut deeper than she'd expected. Adrian's face was stone. This arrangement was always transactional. You knew that. I did, but I thought even transactions had rules. Honesty. Basic respect. Apparently I was wrong. She turned to leave, needing distance before she said something she couldn't take back. Alara. She stopped but didn't turn around. Vivian is here for 2 weeks. After that, she returns to London and things go back to normal. Can you manage that? Or do I need to find alternative arrangements? The threat was clear. Put up with this or be set aside. I'll manage, Alara said, her voice hollow. I always do. She walked out with her spine straight and her head high, every inch the Duchess she was supposed to be. But inside, in the places she didn't let anyone see, she felt the old familiar ache of being unwanted, unnecessary, disposable. The forgotten daughter had learned to survive invisibility. The unwanted Duchess would have to learn to survive replacement. The next 2 days were a carefully orchestrated nightmare. Vivian launched her tutoring with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a legitimate excuse to torment her victim. Breakfast became a critique of Alara's posture. Afternoon tea transformed into lessons on proper conversation topics. Evening became demonstrations of how a real duchess should manage a household. And through it all, Adrian watched with that same detached assessment, as if comparing his current wife to the woman he should have married.
Your walking needs work, Vivian announced on the third morning, circling Alara like a predator evaluating prey.
You move like you're trying to disappear. A duchess commands space. Watch.
She glided across the morning room, every movement studied and perfect, the result of a lifetime of training Alara had never received. Now you try. Alara wanted to refuse, wanted to tell Vivian exactly where she could put her condescending lessons. But Mrs.
Daventry was watching from the doorway, and several servants had found excuses to linger nearby. If she backed down now, she'd lose every bit of authority she'd fought so hard to build. So she walked. Chin up. No, higher. You're not a scullery maid skulking through the halls, shoulders back. For heaven's sake, stop hunching. Each correction was designed to wound, and Vivian delivered them with surgical precision. This is hopeless, Vivian sighed after an hour of torture. Adrian, darling, I really don't know how you expect her to pass in London society. The breeding just isn't there. Adrian looked up from his correspondence. She'll learn. Will she? Or are you hoping to keep her buried here while you maintain your actual life in the city? Vivian moved to lean against his desk, her posture casual and intimate. It's all right to admit this marriage was a mistake, you know. These things happen. Alara's hands clenched into fists. I'm standing right here. Oh, I'm aware, dear, but someone needs to be honest about the situation. You're a sweet girl, really, but you're out of your depth. No amount of tutoring can replace a lifetime of breeding. Then perhaps we should end these lessons, Alara said coldly, since they're clearly pointless. And have you embarrassed Adrian in front of all of London? I think not. No, we'll continue until you're at least passably competent. Consider it my gift to you both. The word gift dripped with condescension. That evening, Alara skipped dinner entirely, claiming a headache. In truth, she couldn't bear another meal watching Vivian position herself as the real lady of the house, while Adrian said nothing, did nothing, allowed it all to continue. She was in her sitting room when Annie appeared with tea and sympathy. The staff are talking, Your Grace, the young maid said quietly. They don't like how Lady Ashford treats you, Mrs. Daventry especially. She says it's improper. Mrs. Daventry can't do anything about it without the Duke's support, and he's made his position clear. Has he, though? Annie set down the tea tray with unusual firmness. Seems to me he hasn't said much of anything, just lets that woman run roughshod over you while he watches. Alara had been thinking the same thing. Adrian's silence was its own message. He approved of Vivian's presence, perhaps even welcomed it. Maybe he regretted his choice of wife and was too honorable to break the contract outright. But bringing Vivian here, letting her humiliate Alara publicly, create doubt about the Duchess's capability, that was a different kind of breaking. I need to be alone, Alara said softly. Annie hesitated, then curtsied and left, taking her sympathy with her. Alara sat in the dark, watching the fire burn down to embers, and felt something inside her harden into diamond. She'd survived her family's betrayal. She'd survived the Cold War with Mrs. Daventry. She'd survived every dismissal, every moment of invisibility, every sacrifice demanded of her. She would survive this too. But survival wasn't enough anymore. She'd been surviving her entire life, accepting scraps and calling it sustenance. Somewhere in the past month, running Blackthorn Hall, building alliances with the staff, standing up to a housekeeper who'd tried to break her, somewhere in all that, Alara had stopped being the forgotten daughter who accepted her fate. She'd become the Duchess, and duchesses didn't surrender their territory to invaders. If Vivian wanted war, she'd get it. The confrontation came on the 5th day of Vivian's visit. Alara had requested a meeting in the study, her territory, where the household ledgers and estate documents proved her competence. She arrived early, arranging the evidence of her work across the desk. When Vivian swept in, fashionably late and deliberately dismissive, she found the Duchess waiting like a general at a war council. How dramatic, Vivian drawled. What's this about? This is about clarifying roles, Alara said calmly. You're a guest in my household, Lady Ashford. Not my tutor, not my supervisor, certainly not the lady of this house. I've tolerated your condescension out of courtesy to my husband, but that courtesy has limits. Vivian's perfect eyebrows rose.
My, we have grown a spine. How refreshing. Adrian, are you hearing this? Alara hadn't realized he was in the room. She turned to find him in the corner, shadows hiding his expression. I'm hearing it, he said quietly. Well then. Vivian settled into a chair uninvited. Let's have it all out, shall we? You think I'm here to replace you, that Adrian brought me to highlight your inadequacies, that we're plotting to set you aside. Aren't you? Of course not, you silly girl. I'm here because Adrian asked me to come, because he was concerned about you, because despite this cold arrangement you've made, he doesn't want you to fail. Alara's gaze cut to Adrian. Is that true? He stepped into the light, and for the first time since Vivian's arrival, he looked uncomfortable. I wanted you to have support. Training I couldn't provide. So you brought the woman you were supposed to marry to teach me how to be her? The words fell like stones in still water. Vivian's expression flickered. Surprised, perhaps, that Alara had figured it out. You were engaged, Alara continued, the pieces falling into place, before our marriage. You and Vivian were supposed to marry, and something happened to break it off. And now she's here, playing duchess in training, reminding you of what you gave up when you settled for the desperate spinster who couldn't say no. It wasn't like that, Adrian said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then tell me how it was. Because I'm done being treated like an embarrassing mistake that needs to be managed and improved and eventually replaced. Vivian stood, her mask of superiority cracking. You want the truth? Fine. Yes, Adrian and I were engaged. Yes, we were supposed to marry. And yes, it would have been a far better match than this disaster. But I broke it off because I wanted more than Adrian was willing to give. Love, partnership, an actual marriage, not a business arrangement. She turned to Adrian, and for the first time, Alara saw real emotion in her face. Pain, regret, anger. But you couldn't do it, could you? Couldn't let yourself be vulnerable, couldn't trust anyone enough to truly let them in. So you found yourself a wife who wouldn't demand those things. Who'd take your money and your title and ask for nothing more. Except it's not working, is it, Adrian? Because she's not content to fade into the wallpaper. She's making you see her, and you hate it. The silence that followed was absolute. Adrian's face was stone, but Alara saw the truth in his rigid posture, the way his hands clenched at his sides. Vivian was right. He'd chosen Alara precisely because she'd seemed safe, undemanding, someone who wouldn't threaten the walls he'd built around himself. But Alara had refused to play that role. Why did you really come here, Vivian? Alara asked quietly. The beautiful woman's laugh was bitter. Because Adrian wrote to me, said he'd made a mistake, asked if I'd reconsider, if we could try again. And fool that I am, I came. Thought maybe watching him with his convenient wife would make me see he'd changed. But he hasn't. He's just as closed off, just as determined to keep everyone at arm's length. And you, she looked at Alara with something that might have been pity. You deserve better than this half-life he's offering. Alara felt the words hit like physical blows. Adrian had written to his former fiancée, had asked her to reconsider, had brought her here to, what? Compare? Choose? Test whether his cold, controlled heart could thaw for the right woman? And Alara wasn't that woman. She turned to Adrian, forcing herself to meet his eyes. Is it true? Did you ask her to come here? He stopped, started again. I thought if you had proper guidance. Did you invite Vivian here, hoping she'd agree to replace me? The pause was answer enough. Alara felt something inside her break and reshape itself simultaneously. The pain was there, sharp and real. She'd been replaced before she'd even had a chance to prove herself. But beneath the pain was something harder, colder, more dangerous. Rage. She'd given up everything for this marriage, her future, her choices, her dignity. She'd fought for her place in this household, earned the respect of the staff, built something from nothing, and all the while her husband had been plotting to trade her in for a better model. Get out, Alara said, her voice dangerously quiet. Vivian blinked. What? Get out of my house, pack your things and leave, today. You can't just... I'm the Duchess of Blackthorn. This is my household. And I'm telling you to leave, now. Vivian looked to Adrian, waiting for him to intervene, to override his wife's order. But Adrian said nothing, his face unreadable. Fine, Vivian said finally. Enjoy your hollow marriage, both of you. You deserve each other. She swept from the room, leaving Alara and Adrian alone in the wreckage of revelations. You were going to replace me, Alara said, each word precise and cutting. Before I'd even had a chance to succeed or fail, you were already planning to set me aside. I was protecting my interests. Your interests? I am your wife, not a piece of furniture you can return if it doesn't match the decor. Her voice rose despite her efforts to stay controlled. I have fought for every inch of respect in this house. I have worked myself to exhaustion learning how to be a duchess worthy of your name, and you've been undermining me the entire time. That's not fair? Fair? Alara laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. You want to talk about fair? You married me to save your inconvenient need for a wife. You paid my family's debts to secure a woman desperate enough to accept your terms. And when I refused to be the meek, invisible placeholder you expected, you brought in your former love to remind me of my place. Don't talk to me about fair, Adrian. You don't know the meaning of the word. What do you want from me? He demanded, his own control finally cracking. I gave you everything we agreed to. Security, title, authority over the household. What more could you possibly want? I want you to see me. The words tore from her throat, raw and honest. Not as a transaction or a mistake or a temporary solution. As a person. As your wife. As someone who deserves basic honesty and respect, even in a loveless marriage. The confession hung between them, more revealing than Alara had intended. She'd promised herself she wouldn't care, wouldn't need validation from this cold man. But standing here, facing the evidence that he'd never even tried to make this work, she realized she did care. She wanted to matter, even in this negotiated union. She wanted to be seen. Adrian stared at her, and for the first time since they'd met, his expression was unguarded. Surprise, confusion, and something that might have been shame. I do see you, he said finally, quietly. That's the problem. What? I see how strong you are. How you've turned this household around, earned loyalty I couldn't command. I see how you stand up to me when no one else dares. I see... He stopped, as if the words cost him something. I see someone I didn't expect. Someone I don't know how to handle. Alara felt her breath catch. So you tried to replace me with someone familiar, someone you understood. I tried to regain control of a situation that was spiraling beyond my management. Adrian moved closer, and Alara forced herself not to retreat. You were supposed to be simple, manageable. Instead, you're complicated and stubborn and completely impossible to ignore. I'll take that as a compliment. It is one, though I suspect you'll make me regret saying it. Something shifted between them. Not warmth exactly, but an acknowledgement that this marriage had become something neither of them had planned for. Alara had forced her way past Adrian's defenses simply by refusing to accept invisibility, and he was struggling to maintain the emotional distance that had always protected him. What happens now? Alara asked. That depends. Can you forgive what I did? Alara considered the question honestly. Could she forgive being replaced before she'd even had a chance to prove herself? Could she trust a man who'd tried to undo their marriage within weeks of the wedding? I don't know, she said finally. But I know I won't be set aside. I won't be replaced. And I won't tolerate another Vivian showing up to remind me I'm not good enough. Those are my terms. Fair enough. Adrian's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. You're terrifying when you're angry. You know that? Good. You should be terrified. I'm done being overlooked. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Daventry appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but Lady Ashford is making quite a scene. She's demanding to speak with the Duke. Says she won't leave until she does. Alara looked at Adrian. Will you send her away? Officially? He held her gaze for a long moment, and Alara saw the decision being made. The choice between the comfortable past and the complicated present. I'll speak with her, Adrian said. Then, to Alara's surprise, he added, with my wife present. Whatever I have to say to Vivian, I'll say in front of the Duchess. It was a small thing, really, but in that moment, with those words, Adrian chose his cold, stubborn, impossible wife over the woman he'd once planned to marry. It wasn't love, it wasn't even affection, but it was acknowledgement, it was respect.
They found Vivian in the entrance hall, surrounded by her luggage and radiating fury. "You're making a mistake," she said the moment she saw Adrian. "This marriage is a disaster waiting to happen. She's not equipped for your world, Adrian. She'll embarrass you, fail you, make you regret every—" "Enough!" Adrian's voice cut through her tirade like a blade. "You're right that this marriage isn't what I planned, but it's what I have, and I don't break my contracts. Elara is my duchess. That's not changing." Vivian's face paled. "You're choosing her over me? Over what we had?" "What we had ended 3 years ago when you walked away. And you were right to leave. I couldn't give you what you needed then, and I still can't. But I made vows to Elara, and I intend to honor them." It wasn't a declaration of love, but for Adrian, for a man who treated emotions like enemies and control like armor, it was something close to a commitment. Vivian looked between them, seeing the decision was final. "You'll regret this." "Probably," Adrian agreed, "but not as much as I'd regret breaking my word." The carriage left an hour later, taking Vivian and her bitterness with it. Elara stood at the window, watching the vehicle disappear down the drive, and felt the weight of the past days lift slightly. She'd survived. More than that, she'd won. But as she turned to find Adrian watching her with that same unreadable expression, she realized victory came with its own complications. Because now they were truly alone, bound in a marriage neither of them wanted, but both were committed to honoring. "What do we do now?" Elara asked. Adrian moved to stand beside her at the window. "We figure it out. Together, apparently." "That terrifies you, doesn't it? Partnership. Sharing control." "Yes," he admitted. "And you? What terrifies you?" Elara considered the question honestly. "That I'll care too much. That this marriage will stop being a transaction and become something real. And that when it does, you'll wish you'd chosen Vivian after all." The confession hung between them, honest and raw. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I don't make the same mistake twice. I invited Vivian here because I was afraid of what you were becoming, afraid of losing control. But watching you stand up to her, refuse to back down, claim your place as duchess, I realized I don't want the woman I could control. I want the woman who refuses to be controlled. Even if she's inconvenient? Especially then." It wasn't love. They both knew that. But it was a foundation, honesty, respect, acknowledgement that they were building something together whether they'd planned to or not. Elara looked up at her husband, this cold, controlled man who'd just chosen her over comfort and safety, and felt something shift in her chest. Not love. Not yet. But the possibility of it, distant and terrifying and real. "Don't make me regret fighting for this marriage," she said quietly. "Don't make me regret choosing you," Adrian replied. And in that moment, standing in the fading light of a February afternoon, the unwanted duchess and the cold duke made a silent pact. They would figure out how to be partners, even if it killed them both. Outside, winter was giving way to early spring. Inside Blackthorn Hall, something equally transformative was beginning to thaw. But neither of them realized that the real battle, the one that would test whether this fragile alliance could survive, was only just beginning. Because in London, word was spreading about the Duke of Blackthorn's unusual new wife, and society never took kindly to outsiders who didn't know their place. The fight for Blackthorn Hall was over. The fight for survival in London society was about to begin. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the regular post, but weighted with far more significance than its cream envelope suggested. Elara recognized the seal immediately. The Duchess of Marlborough, one of London's most influential hostesses, and a woman whose approval could make or destroy a social reputation. She broke the wax with careful fingers, aware that Adrian was watching from across the breakfast table. They'd fallen into an uneasy partnership over the past month since Vivian's departure. Not quite warmth, but a mutual respect that felt like progress. "Well?" Adrian asked when she'd finished reading. "We're invited to the Marlborough Spring Ball 3 weeks from now." Elara set down the letter, keeping her expression neutral despite the anxiety coiling in her stomach. "Your first official appearance as Duchess of Blackthorn will be scrutinized by everyone who matters in London society." "Our first official appearance," Adrian corrected. "And yes, they'll be watching. Waiting to see if you're worthy of the title or just another desperate fortune hunter who married above her station."
The word should have stung. A month ago, they would have. But Alara had learned that Adrian's bluntness was his version of preparation, not cruelty. Then we'll make sure they see a duchess, she said calmly. Not a desperate girl, not a mistake. A force they'll have to acknowledge. Something flickered in Adrian's expression. Approval, perhaps, or the beginning of pride. You'll need proper gowns, jewelry. A lady's maid who actually knows what she's doing. Annie knows what she's doing. Annie is learning. You need someone trained. He paused, then added more gently, I'm not criticizing your loyalty. I'm being practical. London society is vicious, and they'll use any excuse to tear you down. Don't give them one. Alara knew he was right. Annie was devoted and clever, but she'd been a scullery maid 6 weeks ago. Dressing a duchess for battle required experience they didn't have time to acquire. I'll consider it, she said. But Annie stays. She's earned her position. Agreed. Hire someone to train her while helping you prepare. Adrian stood, preparing to leave for his study. And Alara? Don't underestimate how brutal they'll be. London society makes Vivian look kind. After he left, Alara sat alone with the invitation and the weight of what it represented. This was the test Vivian had warned about, the moment when Alara would have to prove she belonged in the world Adrian inhabited. Fail, and she'd confirm every doubt, every whisper that the Duke had made a catastrophic mistake. Succeed, and she might actually claim the respect she'd fought so hard to earn. She called for Mrs. Daventry. The housekeeper appeared within minutes, her expression questioning. Over the past month, they'd developed a working relationship built on mutual respect and shared competence. Mrs. Daventry had stopped trying to undermine Alara, and Alara had stopped treating every suggestion as a challenge to her authority. We're going to London, Alara said without preamble. I need recommendations for a lady's maid with society experience, someone who can prepare me for the Marlborough Ball and teach Annie simultaneously. Mrs. Daventry's eyebrows rose fractionally. That's quite an undertaking, Your Grace. The Duchess of Marlborough's events are legendary for their selectivity, which is why I need the best help I can get. Do you know anyone? I might. There's a woman, Madame Bouchard. French, trained the daughters of 3 duchesses, has an eye for fashion that's nearly supernatural. She's semi-retired now, quite selective about clients. Can you reach her? I can try. Though I should warn you, Your Grace, Madame Bouchard has been known to refuse clients she doesn't believe can be helped. Alara smiled grimly. Then let's hope she enjoys a challenge. Madame Bouchard arrived 3 days later, a whirlwind of silk and sharp assessment wrapped in a woman barely 5 feet tall. She took one look at Alara, circled her like a general surveying a battlefield, and pronounced judgment in heavily accented English. You have good bones, terrible posture, adequate features, abysmal wardrobe. She turned to Adrian, who'd been summoned to this inspection. Your Grace, you ask me to make a duchess from this? In 3 weeks? I ask you to enhance what's already there, Adrian replied coolly. My wife is perfectly capable of being a duchess. She simply needs the proper presentation. Madame Bouchard's sharp eyes narrowed. You believe this? Truly? I wouldn't have married her otherwise. It was a lie, and they all knew it. But Madame Bouchard seemed satisfied with the statement regardless. Very well, I take the challenge. But you... She pointed at Alara with one bony finger. You must trust me completely. No arguing, no resisting, no thinking you know better. I have 3 weeks to transform you. Do we have agreement? Alara met the woman's fierce gaze directly. We do. On one condition, my maid Annie assists and learns. Whatever you teach me, you teach her as well. The scullery maid? Madame Bouchard's laugh was sharp. You have loyalty. Good. Loyalty is rarer than beauty. Yes, the girl can learn. Now, we begin. Remove that dress. I must see what I'm working with. What followed was the most grueling 3 weeks of Alara's life. Madame Bouchard was merciless, critiquing every movement, every expression, every word. She brought in dressmakers who draped Alara in fabrics that cost more than her family's quarterly budget. She hired a dancing master who drilled Alara in waltzes and quadrilles until her feet bled. She even brought in a voice coach to soften Alara's accent and teach her the subtle inflections that separated ladies from commoners. You walk like you're apologizing for existing, Madame Bouchard snapped one afternoon. A duchess commands space. She doesn't ask permission to occupy it. Again. Alara forced herself across the ballroom for the 100th time, channeling frustration into determination. Each step was a declaration. I belong here. I earned this. I will not be invisible. Better, you see? When you're angry, you forget to shrink. Stay angry. Use it. In the evenings, Adrian would appear to observe the progress. He rarely commented, but Alara could feel his assessment, the way he catalogued every improvement and every remaining flaw. You're quieter than usual, she said one night after a particularly brutal day of etiquette lessons. They'd fallen into the habit of sharing late dinners, the only time when the performance of Duchess in training could pause. I'm watching you transform, Adrian replied. It's unexpected. In a good way or bad way? I'm not sure yet. He studied her over his wineglass. You're becoming formidable. I'm uncertain whether to be impressed or concerned. Both, probably. I learned from the best. His mouth curved slightly, that almost smile that appeared more frequently now. Are you saying I'm formidable? I'm saying you're terrifying when you want to be, and I'm learning how to be terrifying too. Good. You'll need it at the Marlborough Ball. They're going to come at you from every angle, subtle insults disguised as compliments, questions designed to expose your background, traps hidden in innocent conversation. You'll need to be sharp and ruthless. Lucky for us, I've had excellent practice in both. Alara met his eyes directly. I survived my family's betrayal. I survived Vivian. I can survive London society. I know you can, Adrian said quietly. That's what concerns me. Why? Because every time you prove you're stronger than I expected, it becomes harder to maintain the distance I need. The confession hung between them, honest and dangerous. They'd been circling this truth for weeks, the growing awareness that their cold arrangement was thawing into something neither of them had planned for. Would it be so terrible? Alara asked, letting the distance go? Yes, Adrian's voice was rough. Because I don't know how to do this. How to care without losing control. How to trust without being destroyed. You think caring about me would destroy you? I think it would change everything. And change terrifies me more than any business rival or social catastrophe. Alara understood. She felt the same fear, the awareness that this marriage was becoming something real, something that could wound them both if it failed. Then we'll figure it out together, she said. Terrified and changing and completely out of our depth. Just like everything else we've done. Adrian's expression softened fractionally. When did you become so brave? When I realized I had no choice. Cowardice was a luxury I couldn't afford. They sat in companionable silence, two people bound by contract, learning to be bound by something more complex and infinitely more fragile. The night of the Marlborough Ball arrived with the weight of Judgment Day. Alara stood in her chambers while Annie and Madame Bouchard made final adjustments to her gown, an emerald silk creation that transformed her from overlooked spinster to unmistakable duchess. The previous duchess's diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, reclaimed from storage and polished to brilliance. You look every inch a duchess, Annie whispered, tears in her eyes. They won't know what hit them. Madame Bouchard stepped back, assessing her work with a critical eye. Finally, she nodded. Yes, this is good. Better than good. You are magnificent, Your Grace. Now remember, chin high, shoulders back, no apologizing. You are Duchess of Blackthorn. Make them remember it. Alara descended the stairs to find Adrian waiting in the entrance hall. When he looked up and saw her, something flashed in his eyes. Surprise, heat, unmistakable admiration. Well? She asked, fighting the urge to fidget with her gloves. You'll do, he said, but his voice was rough around the edges. Just do. If I tell you how stunning you look, it'll go to your head. Can't have that. Too late. Madame Bouchard has been inflating my confidence for 3 weeks. Adrian offered his arm, and for the first time since their wedding, the gesture felt natural rather than obligatory. Ready to face the wolves? Only if you promise not to let them eat me alive. I promise nothing, but I'll watch with interest. The carriage ride to Marlborough House was tense with anticipation. Adrian briefed her on the key players they'd encounter, the Duchess of Marlborough herself, a woman who could make or break reputations with a single raised eyebrow. Lady Catherine Winters, the reigning beauty who'd expected to catch Adrian herself. Lord and Lady Pemberton, her sister Cecilia's future in-laws, who'd been aghast when the eldest Whitcomb married a duke, and dozens of others whose names and allegiances Alara struggled to remember. "Stop memorizing," Adrian said, watching her lips move silently. "You'll make yourself anxious. Just be yourself. The woman who stood up to Vivian and won. That woman was fighting for her home. This is different." "Is it?" "You're still fighting for your place. The location has simply changed." Marlborough House blazed with light and music, a palace of judgment dressed as a party. As their carriage joined the queue, Alara could see other guests arriving. Women in jewels that could fund small countries, men who moved with the arrogance of inherited power. She'd never felt more out of place in her life. Adrian must have sensed her anxiety because his hand covered hers briefly. "You've already won the hard battle. This is just theater, and you're excellent at performing when necessary." The entry was designed for maximum intimidation, a double staircase leading to a ballroom so vast it could have fit Whitcomb House inside it twice. As they were announced, hundreds of heads turned to assess the Duke of Blackthorn and his mysterious new wife. Alara felt the weight of their judgment like a physical force. She saw calculation in some eyes, disdain in others, curiosity in many. These were people who'd built their power on knowing everyone's secrets, everyone's weaknesses. And she was a blank slate they desperately wanted to fill in. The Duchess of Marlborough descended upon them immediately, a silver-haired woman whose smile could freeze wine. "Blackthorn, how delightful to finally see you at one of my gatherings, and this must be your bride." Her eyes raked over Alara with the precision of a jeweler appraising a stone. "Charming, quite unexpected." "Your Grace," Alara said, executing a perfect curtsy. "Thank you for your gracious invitation. Yes, well, one must welcome new additions to our circle, mustn't one? Even when they're so very novel." The word was a blade wrapped in velvet. "Tell me, my dear, how are you finding your role as Duchess? Not too overwhelming, I hope." The trap was obvious. Agree and seem incompetent. Disagree and seem arrogant. Alara smiled serenely. "I find it remarkably similar to any complex management position, Your Grace. One simply needs competent staff, clear objectives, and the ability to make difficult decisions. Fortunately, I've had excellent training in all three." The Duchess's eyebrows rose fractionally. She hadn't expected capability packaged with courtesy. "How practical. And where did you receive this excellent training?" "Life, Your Grace. There's no better teacher." A pause waited with assessment. Then the Duchess smiled, genuinely this time. "Indeed. How refreshing to meet someone who doesn't pretend their advantages were earned rather than inherited. We'll speak more later, my dear. I find you far more interesting than expected." She swept away, leaving Alara slightly breathless from the encounter. "Well done," Adrian murmured. "You just passed the first test. She respects honesty more than pretense." "One down. How many more to go?" "At least 100. Shall we dance? It'll give you a brief respite before the next attack." Adrian led her onto the floor as a waltz began, and Alara was grateful for Madame Bouchard's relentless drilling. The steps came naturally now, muscle memory replacing conscious thought. "You're tense," Adrian said as they moved through the figures. "I'm being watched by everyone in this room." "Then give them something worth watching." He pulled her slightly closer than strictly proper, and Alara felt heat bloom where their hands joined. Around them, she could see other dancers noticing, whispering. The cold Duke of Blackthorn showing public affection for his convenient wife. That was news. "You're doing that on purpose," Alara accused. "Doing what?" "Making them think this marriage is real, that you actually chose me rather than settling." "Who says I'm pretending?" The words caught her off guard, and she missed a step. Adrian steadied her smoothly, his grip firm. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be tonight. I have enough to manage without wondering if you mean what you're implying." "Fair enough. But Alara, for what it's worth, every eye in this room is on you, and not one person is seeing the desperate spinster I married. They're seeing a duchess, my duchess, and they're intimidated by you." Before she could respond, the waltz ended, and they were immediately surrounded by people demanding introductions. Adrian handled it smoothly, presenting Alara to earl after countess after lord, each interaction a small test of her polish and poise. Lady Catherine Winters proved to be the evening's second major challenge. Beautiful in a way that made men stupid and women vicious, she cornered Alara near the refreshment table with a smile that promised violence. "So you're the mysterious bride," Catherine purred. "We were all so surprised when Adrian married. Shocked, really. He'd always been so clear about preferring his independence." "People change," Alara replied calmly. "Do they? Or do circumstances force their hand?" Catherine's eyes glittered. "I heard your family was quite desperate. Debts, wasn't it? How fortunate that Adrian needed a convenient wife at precisely that moment." The insult was blatant, designed to provoke a reaction that would confirm Alara's unsuitability. "Yes, quite fortunate," Alara agreed pleasantly. "Almost as fortunate as you being here tonight, still unmarried despite your considerable, advantages. One might think if beauty alone was sufficient, you'd have secured a duke yourself by now." Catherine's smile froze. Around them, several people had stopped to listen, and Alara could see them fighting smiles at her counterattack. "Careful, Duchess," Catherine said softly. "You're new to our world. You don't understand how easily reputations can be destroyed. And you don't understand how little I care about reputation when I'm defending what's mine." Alara met Catherine's eyes directly, letting her see the steel beneath the silk. "Adrian is my husband. This is my title. Anyone who tries to take either will discover just how ruthless a desperate woman can be when she has nothing left to lose." The silence that followed was electric. Then someone laughed, a gentleman Alara didn't recognize. "I like her, Blackthorn," he called across the crowd. "She's got spine. About time someone put Catherine in her place." The tension broke, and Catherine retreated with as much dignity as she could salvage. Adrian appeared at Alara's elbow, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "That was brutal," he said with evident approval. "She called our marriage a transaction in front of half of London society. I wasn't going to let that stand unchallenged." "No, you weren't. You're learning to fight like they do, with smiles and pretty words that cut deeper than knives." He handed her a glass. "I'm proud of you." The words, simple and unexpected, hit harder than any compliment Catherine could have offered. Adrian didn't give praise lightly. Earning it meant something. "Don't let it go to my head," Alara said, echoing his earlier words. "Too late. You're already insufferable." They smiled at each other, and Alara realized the performance had shifted into something genuine. They weren't just playing the role of Duke and Duchess anymore. They were becoming it. The evening progressed in a blur of introductions and subtle warfare. Alara fielded questions about her background with practiced honesty, turning potential weaknesses into evidence of character. She danced with lords who tested her knowledge and ladies who tested her composure. She parried insults and accepted genuine compliments with equal grace. And through it all, Adrian was there, a steady presence at her shoulder, silently supporting without overshadowing. It was Lord Pemberton who provided the evening's climax. Alara's sister Cecilia's future father-in-law approached with his wife, both wearing expressions of barely concealed horror. "Duchess," Lord Pemberton said stiffly, "I must admit your elevation was quite surprising to our family." "I imagine it was," Alara replied smoothly, "given that you were under the impression the Whitcomb family had nothing to offer beyond my sister's considerable charms. We were assured your family's financial difficulties were temporary. Had we known the extent of the situation, you'd have dropped Cecilia immediately," Alara finished. "Yes, I'm aware. Which is precisely why I married the Duke, to ensure my sister's match proceeded without the stain of bankruptcy ruining her prospects." Lady Pemberton's expression shifted from disdain to calculation. "You sacrificed yourself for your sister's sake?" "I made a strategic decision that benefited everyone involved. I wouldn't call it sacrifice. I'd call it intelligent management of limited resources." Lord Pemberton studied her with new respect. "That's remarkably pragmatic." "Yes, well, desperation breeds clarity, and I was very desperate." Alara smiled pleasantly. "But I'm not desperate anymore. Now I'm simply a duchess, ensuring her family maintains the appropriate social standing. I trust that won't be a problem for Cecilia's upcoming wedding?" The threat was subtle but unmistakable. "Challenge my sister's match, and you'll face the combined power of the Blackthorn name and a duchess who's already proven she fights dirty." "Of course not," Lord Pemberton said quickly. "The wedding proceeds as planned.
We're delighted to welcome the Whitcomb family into our circle. When they'd gone, Adrian's quiet laugh made Alara turn. What? You just strong-armed a Viscount into accepting your sister's marriage by threatening him with your new status. That was masterful. I learned from watching you negotiate. Identify leverage, apply pressure, secure victory. I've created a monster. You've created a partner. There's a difference. The warmth in Adrian's eyes was unmistakable now. This wasn't the cold assessment of their early marriage or the grudging respect that had followed Vivian's departure. This was something else entirely. Admiration, attraction, the beginning of genuine affection. It terrified and thrilled Alara in equal measure. The ball wound down near midnight, guests departing in clusters of gossip and speculation. As Adrian led Alara to their carriage, she could feel the weight of the evening settling into her bones, exhaustion mixed with exhilaration. You survived, Adrian said as they settled into their seats. I did more than survive. I won. Yes, you did. He was quiet for a moment, then added, I was wrong about you. In what way? I thought you needed me to succeed, that without my name and my money, you'd fade back into obscurity. But watching you tonight, standing up to Catherine, handling the Pembertons, earning the Duchess of Marlborough's respect, I realized you'd have found a way to succeed regardless. You didn't need me. You chose to partner with me. There's a difference. Alara felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She'd spent so long being told she was worthless without her family's name, then worthless without Adrian's title. To hear him acknowledge that she had value independent of either, thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me. Finally, completely seeing me. Adrian's hand found hers in the darkness of the carriage. I've been seeing you since the day you stood in your father's drawing room and demanded dignity in a marriage that offered none. I was just too stubborn to admit it. And now? Now I'm admitting it. You're formidable, Alara. You're brilliant and brave and absolutely terrifying when you're angry, and I'm... He paused, the words clearly difficult. I'm starting to care what happens to you. Not because you're my duchess or my responsibility, but because you're you. It wasn't a declaration of love, but for Adrian, for a man who guarded his emotions like state secrets, it was surrender. Alara squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They rode in silence the rest of the way to their London townhouse, but it was a different silence than before. Warm, companionable, weighted with possibility rather than distance. The next morning, Alara woke to find London Society's verdict delivered in the form of calling cards stacked on the entrance hall table. Dozens of them. Invitations to teas, requests for audiences, acknowledgments from ladies who'd assessed her at the ball and decided she was worth knowing. Mrs. Daventry, who'd accompanied them to London, surveyed the pile with satisfaction. You've done it, Your Grace. They've accepted you. They've acknowledged me, Alara corrected. Acceptance will take longer, but it's a start. Adrian appeared as she was sorting through the cards, already dressed for business meetings. The Duke of Marlborough wants to meet with me, he said without preamble. He mentioned being impressed by my wife's management capabilities. Asked if you'd be interested in consulting on some household efficiency matters for his estates. Alara looked up sharply. He wants my advice? Apparently your reputation for turning around Blackthorn Hall has spread. Word is you're ruthlessly efficient and diplomatically brutal, valuable qualities in estate management. And you? Are you comfortable with your wife working? Adrian smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. I married a woman who refused to be decorative. Why would I try to cage her now? Besides, if you can help Marlborough run his estates better, he'll owe me a favor. That's good business. Always the pragmatist. Always. Though I'll admit, watching London society scramble to accommodate you is remarkably satisfying. You've made them all recalculate what a duchess can be. Alara felt warmth bloom in her chest. She'd done exactly what she'd set out to do, proved she belonged, earned respect, claimed her place. The forgotten daughter had become the duchess everyone wanted to know. But more importantly, she'd earned something she hadn't expected, Adrian's genuine regard, his partnership, the beginning of something that might, eventually, become love. What happens now? She asked. Adrian moved closer, and Alara's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. Now we build on what we've started. We run our estates, manage our properties, and show London that the Blackthorns are a force to be reckoned with. He paused,
then added more softly, "Together." "Together," Alara agreed. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined when she'd accepted his cold proposal, but it was better. Real partnership built on respect and honesty, with the possibility of love waiting just beyond the horizon. The Duchess had claimed her throne. Now she would help her Duke learn to share it. The partnership flourished over the following months in ways that surprised them both. Adrian brought Alara into his business dealings, discovering she had an instinct for investment that matched his own ruthless pragmatism. Alara brought Adrian into the social mechanisms that actually ran London society, teaching him that power wasn't just money and titles. It was influence, connection, the subtle web of favors and obligations that bound the aristocracy together. They were formidable separately. Together, they were becoming unstoppable. But the real test came in late summer, when a letter arrived that threatened to destroy everything they'd built. Alara found Adrian in his study, the letter crushed in his fist, his face a mask of cold fury she hadn't seen since their wedding day. "What's wrong?" He looked up, and the rawness in his expression made her breath catch. "Vivian, she's been spreading rumors in London, claims our marriage is a sham, that I'm keeping you isolated at Blackthorn Hall while maintaining my real life in the city. She's telling everyone you're incompetent, that the household improvements were Mrs. Daventry's work, that I regret marrying you and am actively seeking an annulment." Alara felt ice settle in her stomach. Can she prove any of this? She doesn't need proof. She has credibility. Former fiancé, family friend, someone who knows me intimately. And you're still new enough that society wants to believe the worst. Half of London is already discussing whether I'll set you aside by year's end. The words hit like physical blows. After everything she'd accomplished, everything she'd proven, one vindictive woman could undo it all with well-placed whispers. What do we do? Adrian stood, pacing like a caged predator. I could confront her, threaten legal action, but that might make it worse, make it look like the rumors have merit. Or, Alara said slowly, an idea forming, we could prove them wrong so decisively that no one will ever question our marriage again. How? You said the Duke of Marlborough wants my consulting advice on his estates. What if we expand that? What if I don't just consult? What if I establish myself as an authority on estate management? Host a symposium, invite the most influential families, demonstrate capabilities that make Vivian's claims laughable. Adrian stopped pacing. You want to publicly challenge her narrative by becoming so visibly competent that the rumors die of their own absurdity? I want to make myself undeniable. Make us undeniable. Show London society that we're not just surviving this marriage, we're thriving in it. That you didn't settle for a desperate spinster. You chose a partner who makes you stronger. A slow smile spread across Adrian's face, predatory and proud. You're going to declare war on Vivian's reputation by being so successful she looks foolish for doubting you. Exactly. And you're going to help me do it. The planning took weeks of meticulous preparation. Alara didn't just want to host a symposium, she wanted to create an event that would reshape how society viewed women's roles in estate management. With Adrian's contacts and her growing reputation, they assembled an impressive roster of speakers. Estate managers who'd implemented innovative farming techniques, architects who'd revolutionized household design, even a few progressive lords willing to discuss how their wives' management had increased their holdings' profitability. The invitations went out under both their names, the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn, jointly hosting an educational forum on modern estate management. It was unconventional, slightly scandalous, and guaranteed to attract attention. Vivian's response arrived 3 days later, delivered by messenger with theatrical urgency. Alara read it aloud to Adrian over dinner. How delightful that the Duchess has found a hobby to occupy her time. One hopes she won't embarrass herself, or you, with pretensions of expertise she clearly lacks. I'll be attending, of course. Someone needs to witness this inevitable disaster. She's going to try to sabotage you, Adrian said flatly. Publicly, viciously, with witnesses. I know. I'm counting on it. Alara, listen to me. She set down the letter, meeting his eyes directly. Vivian's mistake is thinking I'm still the desperate girl you married. That I'm fragile, uncertain, easy to break. But I'm not that person anymore. I fought for every inch of respect I have. I've earned my place, and I'm going to prove it in front of everyone who matters in London society. Adrian studied her for a long moment.
Then he stood, moved around the table, and pulled her to her feet. His hands framed her face with unexpected gentleness. "You're magnificent when you're defiant," he said quietly. "Has anyone ever told you that?" "You did, once, right before you admitted you were starting to care about me." "I was wrong." Alara's heart stuttered. "About caring? About starting to?" I'm well past the beginning, Alara. He paused, the words clearly difficult. "I'm in love with my wife. Completely, inconveniently, irrevocably in love with the woman who refuses to be anything less than extraordinary." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying in its sincerity. "Adrian, you don't have to say it back. I know this wasn't what you signed up for. A business arrangement turning into actual feeling. But I needed you to know, before you face Vivian, that you're not fighting alone. Whatever happens at this symposium, I'm with you. Not because of our contract, but because I choose you. Every day, I choose you." Alara felt tears spill over, hot and unexpected. She'd spent so long building walls around her heart, protecting herself from caring too much about this cold marriage. But the walls had crumbled somewhere along the way, eroded by Adrian's quiet support, his growing respect, the moments when he looked at her like she was something precious rather than convenient. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't want to, didn't plan to, but you made it impossible not to." Adrian kissed her then, and it was nothing like the dutiful brush of lips at their wedding. This was claiming, celebrating, a promise that what they'd built was real and worth fighting for. When they finally pulled apart, Alara was breathless and shaking. "Now I have even more reason to destroy Vivian's credibility," she said. "She tried to take you from me once. I won't let her do it again." "Then let's give her a battle she'll never forget." The day of the symposium dawned clear and bright, as if even the weather was cooperating with Alara's ambitions. The event was held at Blackthorn's London residence, a deliberate choice that showcased their united front. Servants moved with practiced efficiency, setting up the ballroom for presentations, arranging seats for the 100 guests who'd confirmed attendance. Alara stood in the entrance hall, watching the preparations, when Mrs. Daventry appeared at her elbow. "Everything's ready, Your Grace. The speakers are assembled, the materials distributed, even the refreshments are timed perfectly." The housekeeper paused, then added, "You've done something remarkable here. Whatever happens today, remember that." "Thank you, Mrs. Daventry, for everything. I couldn't have done any of this without your support." "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." The older woman's expression softened. "The late Duchess would be proud. You've become everything she wanted to be, but never had the strength to claim." The guests began arriving at noon, a carefully curated mix of influential families, progressive thinkers, and enough gossips to ensure word of the day's events would spread throughout London society. Alara greeted each one with the polish Madame Bouchard had drilled into her, but beneath the perfect courtesy was steel. Vivienne arrived fashionably late, dressed in crimson silk that screamed for attention. She swept through the entrance like she owned it, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Duchess, how brave of you to attempt this. I do hope you've prepared adequately. Public failure can be so devastating." "Lady Ashford, how kind of you to attend. Though I must admit I'm surprised you'd waste your valuable time on what you've publicly dismissed as amateur pretension." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "I wouldn't miss this for anything. Watching you realize you're out of your depth will be delicious." "Then I hope you brought a strong stomach. Disappointment can be so difficult to digest." They smiled at each other, two women who'd fought over the same man now fighting over territory neither would surrender. Adrian appeared, offering his arm to Alara with deliberate intimacy. "Shall we begin?" The symposium opened with Adrian's introduction, a speech he'd written himself that positioned Alara not as his wife playing at work, but as a legitimate authority whose innovations at Blackthorn Hall had increased efficiency by 30% and staff satisfaction by even more. "My wife has accomplished in months what most estate managers fail to achieve in years," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "And she's done it while navigating the additional burden of society's skepticism. Today she's going to share what she's learned. I suggest you all pay attention. I certainly am." The endorsement was public, powerful, and unmistakable. Adrian wasn't just supporting Alara, he was staking his reputation on her competence. Vivian's expression curdled. Alara took the floor, her prepared remarks dissolving in favor of honest passion. She spoke about the systems she'd implemented, the resistance she'd faced, the small victories that accumulated into transformation. She shared numbers, hard data that proved her methods worked. She invited questions, handling skeptical inquiries with the same directness that had earned Mrs. Daventry's respect months ago. And then the other speakers presented: estate managers who'd adopted Alara's techniques, lords whose holdings had improved under their wives' oversight, architects who'd designed the innovations Alara had championed. Each presentation built on the last, creating an undeniable narrative. Collaborative management worked. Women's contributions had measurable value, and the Duchess of Blackthorn was at the forefront of a revolution in how estates operated. By the time they broke for refreshments, the room was buzzing with animated discussion. Alara could see the shift in how people looked at her, not with condescension or doubt, but with genuine respect. Vivian cornered her near the drinks table, her composure finally cracking. "You think you've won," she hissed. "You think one successful event erases the fact that you're still just a desperate girl who married for money?" "No," Alara said calmly. "One successful event doesn't erase my past, but it does prove that my past doesn't define my future. I was a desperate girl who married for survival. Now I'm a duchess who's earned her position through work and capability. That transformation? That's what terrifies you." "I'm not terrified of you." "Yes, you are. Because you walked away from Adrian thinking no one could replace what you offered him. But I didn't replace you, Vivian. I became something entirely different. Something he chose, not because he couldn't have you, but because he wanted me more. He'll never love you the way he loved me. You're right. He loves me better. Because what you two had was safe and familiar. What we have is partnership, messy and complicated and built on actually knowing each other. You taught him what he didn't want. I'm teaching him what he does." Vivian's face paled with fury. "You think you're so clever, so superior, but you're still just the Duchess of Blackthorn." Adrian's voice cut through Vivian's tirade. He'd appeared silently, his expression colder than Alara had ever seen it. "My wife, my partner, the woman I love. And if you ever speak to her with anything less than the respect her position demands, you'll find yourself unwelcome in every home that values my goodwill. Are we clear, Lady Ashford?" The public rebuke was devastating. Around them, conversation had stopped. Witnesses cataloging every word for later gossip. Vivian looked between them, seeing the united front, the genuine affection, the partnership she'd never achieved with Adrian. In that moment, she finally understood. She'd lost. Not just the battle, but the war. "Crystal clear, Your Grace." She turned to leave, then paused. "I hope you know what you're giving up. The freedom, the control, the safety of distance." "I know exactly what I'm gaining," Adrian replied. "Something you'll never understand. Love that makes me stronger, not weaker." Vivian left without another word, her crimson dress disappearing through the crowd like a wound closing. The afternoon session continued, but Alara barely processed it. She was still reeling from Adrian's public declaration, the way he'd chosen her in front of everyone who mattered. This wasn't private vulnerability shared in late-night conversations. This was proclamation, commitment, a line drawn that would be discussed in drawing rooms across London for months. When the symposium finally concluded, the guests departed in clusters of animated discussion. The Duchess of Marlborough stopped on her way out, her expression approving. "Well done, my dear. You've given them something to think about, and you've proven that the next generation of duchesses will be far more formidable than the last." She glanced at Adrian. "You chose well, Blackthorn. Better than you knew." "I'm aware," Adrian said, his hand finding Alara's, though it took me longer than it should have to realize it. When they were finally alone in the empty ballroom, surrounded by the evidence of Alara's triumph, Adrian pulled her into his arms. "You did it," he said. "Not just survived, dominated. Every person who attended today will go home and reconsider what a duchess can be, what women can accomplish. You've started something, Alara." "We've started something," she corrected. "I couldn't have done this without your support." "Yes, you could have. But I'm grateful you didn't have to."
He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. I know I said this earlier, but I need you to hear it again. I love you. Not because you're convenient or useful or good for my reputation. Because you're you, stubborn and brilliant and completely impossible to ignore. I love you too. Even though you're controlling and cold and still learning how to show emotion without looking constipated. Adrian's laugh was surprised and genuine. I do not look constipated. You absolutely do. But I find it endearing now, so it's fine. They stood in the fading afternoon light, holding each other in the wreckage of their victory, and Alara felt something settle in her chest, a peace she'd never expected to find in this marriage. The forgotten daughter was gone, replaced by a woman who'd claimed her power and refused to apologize for it. The unwanted duchess had become irreplaceable, and the cold, controlled duke had learned to love without losing himself. The scandal that followed Vivian's public humiliation was everything Alara had hoped for. Within a week, the story had spread through every drawing room in London. Lady Ashford had tried to destroy the Duchess of Blackthorn's reputation and been systematically dismantled in front of society's most influential families. The Duke himself had declared his love publicly, defending his wife with a ferocity that made it clear the marriage was anything but convenient. The rumors died, not gradually, but completely, suffocated by the weight of evidence and Adrian's unmistakable commitment. But the real victory came 2 months later, when Alara's symposium bore fruit in ways she hadn't anticipated. 3 duchesses requested her consultation on their estates. A prominent journal on agricultural innovation asked her to write a monthly column. The Royal Society for the Improvement of Natural Knowledge invited her to speak, the first woman to do so in their 100-year history. She'd become exactly what she'd promised Adrian she could be, undeniable. They returned to Blackthorn Hall in autumn, the estate transformed by Alara's management and made warm by their growing affection. As they rode through the gates, Alara noticed changes that hadn't existed when they'd left. New cottages for workers, repaired roads, expanded fields. "You've been making improvements," she said, turning to Adrian in the carriage. "We've been making improvements. I simply implemented your recommendations while you were conquering London society." He smiled, the expression coming more easily now. "Did you think I wasn't paying attention to your estate plans? I thought you were too busy with business to care about agricultural rotation schedules. I care about everything that matters to you, which means I care about efficient field drainage and proper worker housing, apparently." Laura laughed, the sound free and joyful in a way the forgotten daughter had never been allowed to be. That evening, they walked through the formal gardens, redesigned by Alara to be beautiful but also functional, with herbs for the kitchen and cutting flowers for the house. The late autumn sun painted everything gold, and Alara felt a contentment she'd spent her entire life chasing. "Do you regret it?" Adrian asked suddenly. "The life you could have had if you'd refused my proposal? If you'd gambled on finding someone who loved you from the start?" Alara considered the question honestly. "I regret the pain it cost to get here. I regret that we both had to learn the hard way that partnership is built, not bought. But the outcome? No. I don't regret this. Even though I made you fight for every inch of respect? Especially because of that. Easy victories don't change you. Hard ones transform you completely." She turned to face him fully. "You made me fight, Adrian, and in fighting I discovered I was stronger than anyone, including myself, believed possible. That's a gift, even if it came wrapped in difficulty. You're remarkably generous to someone who made your life hell for months. You're